The Barbarian War, Chapters 31 and 32, Trial by Fire and Steel. Chapter 31. The races of the old triumvirate were about the furthest thing imaginable from the notion of wild-eyed radicals. Until the First Konhim War, their society had gone unchanged for millennia, and even its introduction to humanity had caused barely a ripple. Stability, order, tradition, caution, and an almost ruthless preservation of the status quo had been their watchwords for as long as anyone could remember. The war changed all that, as wars tend to do. With humanity's star now in ascension, change came at a breakneck pace, as one revered institution after another came crashing down. Even by human standards, the metamorphosis was a radical one, driven by the need to create a military force from scratch, as well as the necessary support structures essential to keep it supplied and operational. For species long used to the static civilization of the triumvirate, the tetrarchy came rushing at them like a fever dream. As predicted, many were unhappy with this turn of events. It was that same frustration that had fueled the minister's coup d'etat, as well as the attack on Earth. When Admiral Matavosian destroyed the triumvirate fleet, the ministers lost their greatest offensive power. Still, they had the support of masses, those same individuals who had chafed against their society's upheaval. Except, those same individuals had spent 10 years growing accustomed to the new changes. They still didn't care for them, but they were at least used to them. They had learned to grit their teeth and, in the parlance of humanity, go with the flow. It was an adjustment, but one they were slowly coming to terms with. And then the minister's coup came along and upended the apple cart. Again. The irony of the situation was as thick as molasses. By giving the people what they'd thought they wanted, a return to simpler times, they had attacked what the masses truly craved, stability. The chaos that followed the coup left them simmering with rage, but it was a rage without direction or focus. Leandra Singh's speech gave them that focus, pointing it straight at the ministers with the intensity of a laser. "This has to be the most well-behaved riot I've ever seen," Leandra remarked, thoroughly nonplussed. She and the other ministers stood in the plaza in front of the ministry building, flanked by security officers they knew they could trust. Beyond them, thousands of Tetrarchy citizens milled about, drawn to the heart of the government by her words, but unsure what to do next. The ministry had security forces of their own guarding the entrance, and so far, no one had been willing to attempt a breach. At the moment, it was a standoff. "I thought this is what you wanted," Thrasoth said in confusion. They did take to the streets, after all. She fought the urge to bury her face in her hands. "This is supposed to be a revolution, not a Volksmarch," Leandra lamented. "If I'd known they were just going to come out and enjoy the fresh air, we could have had it catered." Bizagab shrugged helplessly. "You must understand this is all new to us. We have no experience in overthrowing governments." Leandra pointed an accusing finger at the ministry building. "They managed to figure it out," she shot back. "Why can't you?" "Prime Minister, while we understand your frustration, the situation is unlikely to change," Omega 445 intersect Gamma said cautiously. "Unless, of course, someone were to go out there and lead them." The three ministers looked at her expectantly as she raised her head to the heavens. "Vishnu, grant me strength," she groaned before looking back at them. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth, before marching over to one of the security officers. Several were carrying handheld voice amplifiers for crowd control, devices much more compact than the bullhorns of old. Within minutes, she had claimed one for herself and had clambered up on an abstract sculpture, surveying the crowd. "Listen to me!" she shouted, her voice echoing across the plaza. "What the hell is wrong with you? Do you think they will just give you back your freedom? Do you?" The crowd stared back at her blankly, though those nearest to her began shaking their heads. "Do you?" she screamed again, and this time she could hear muttered no's coming from her audience. "Do you?" she howled as she cranked the volume to maximum. "No!" the mob shouted back, finally finding their voice. "Damn right they won't!" she snarled, dialing the volume back down. "Let me tell you something humans learned the hard way, long ago, that freedom isn't free. It is bought and paid for with the blood of those willing to fight for it. No one will give you your freedom. You have to reach out and take it." From somewhere in the back, a chant began. It was muffled at first, but it quickly spread across the courtyard as others joined in, the sound rising and swelling like a tsunami. "Freedom! Freedom! Freedom!" Leandra threw out her arms, as if to embrace them all, before whirling around and pointing dramatically at the ministry building. "And there in that building are those that would deny you your freedom. Are you going to accept that? Are you going to roll over like good little slaves and let them? Or are you going to fight?" The roar of the crowd slammed into her like a hurricane. "Fight! Fight! Fight!" "Then follow me!" she screamed, hopping off the sculpture and striding purposefully towards the ministry, with the crowd swelling behind her. She could feel their fury as they swept forward, sweeping up everything in their path. And as they reached the steps, the ministry guards shrank back in fear, nervously eyeing the mob. Without pause, Leandra mounted the steps, heading straight for the guard commander, stopping mere inches from his position, with the throng pressing in close behind her. A hush fell over the crowd as she addressed the guards. "You have a choice," she said evenly. "Lay down your arms and join us, or—" She turned to face the mob, a cruel smile on her face before returning her attention back to the commander. A cheer rose from the congregation as the guards hastily disarmed themselves. Her own security quickly snatched up the weapons, keeping them out of the hands of those that might be tempted to use them indiscriminately. Leandra turned and faced the crowd once more. "Surround the building," she shouted. "Let no one escape. The rest of you, follow me." The crowd surged forward yet again, sweeping her along as they raced for the elevators. The cars were packed to capacity and beyond before flying up to the top floor, disgorging their passengers with Leandra still leading the pack. The ministry chamber was just as she remembered it. Apparently they hadn't quite gotten around to redecorating. She flashed back to all those times she had approached these same ministers as a supplicant years before, begging for scraps, only to be rejected at every turn. Her lips curled up, baring her teeth, as she marched confidently forward. She sure as hell wasn't begging this time. Amazingly, they were still in the chamber. Leandra had been certain they would have fled for safety by now. Maybe they thought they were safe here, untouchable. Oops? The trio stared at the crowd in panic, as Komzoisha actually produced a sidearm and tried to point it in her direction. His hand was trembling like a leaf, obviously unfamiliar with the deadly weapon as Leandra rolled her eyes. "A bitch, please." With 2 long strides, she was on the dais, raising back her arm and slapping the weapon from his hand. It skittered away across the floor as the trio stood frozen in fear. "Lock them up," Leandra commanded, pointing at the ministers. The mob reached out eagerly for them, as she was suddenly forced to interpose her body between the crowd and their new prisoners. "In one piece, damn it," she growled. "They'll stand trial according to the law. There'll be no lynching on my watch." Mollified, the crowd dragged them away with minimum jostling, as Leandra sighed in relief. She walked over to her chair and collapsed in a heap, slowly shaking her head. "Bloody amateurs," she muttered. Chapter 32. "Is all in readiness?" Chugaz Uidan inquired of his aide. "Yes, Dayaksh," the aide replied as he handed over a plain black case. "Your blade, as you requested, as well as the other items." Chugaz opened the case and removed the dagger, its steel glinting in the light. No hint of the Xabhawk's opiate could be seen along its edge. It wouldn't kill Jiaj Guyaz, for that would be far too obvious. Instead, it would merely slow him down enough to drop his guard. The former Diaksh was a skilled warrior beyond par, and anyone who faced him in a fair contest was at a distinct disadvantage. Not that he had any intention of allowing the battle to be fair. The other items in the case were carefully secreted on his person as well. Any one of them could easily tip the balance in his favor, as only a fool kept a single arrow in his quiver. There was only one way this contest would end, with the death of Jiaj Guyaz. "Then let us not keep my challenger waiting," Chugaz said with a chuckle, as they headed towards the shuttle bay. "Someone remind me again why I signed off on this insanity?" Lin complained to no one in particular. "It is a little late to object to the plan, Sergeant," Jiaj jested as they stood in the arena. "Actually, I've been objecting all along," Lin pointed out. "Not that it mattered." "We had no other viable options," Nasat said in resignation. "At least this contest gives us a fighting chance. And it allowed us to retrieve the other teams, the ones still alive, I mean," he said quietly. It had taken several hours, but Chugaz Uiden had finally responded to Jiaj's challenge. The protocol involved was rather complicated, filled with all sorts of arcane traditions and curlicues. One of the rights granted to the challenger was safe passage for his clan to act as witness, which in this case he asserted was the ill-fated unit that had accompanied him to the surface. It had caused some debate, claiming they were acting in loco gens, but finally they had wrangled the necessary permissions. He had also arranged for transport, and as the survivors began to arrive, they realized just how seriously they'd been hurt. If this contest ended badly? Musashi raised an eyebrow at Nasat's comment, but said nothing. Instead, his attention was on the arena itself, as ancient as the Colosseum in Rome, as it filled with Konhim warriors. He stepped away from the others and spoke softly into his mic. Musashi to the team, are you in position? In position, Tango replied. Have eyes on the crowd and a good hide. The only way they'll find me is if they trip over me. Systems up and running, Greybird chimed in. I'm tapped into their comms. They try and pull a fast one, I'll whistle for the cavalry. I thought we were the cavalry, Whisper laughed. Knock it off, Musashi growled. You all tucked in? Snug as a bug, Whisper giggled. Just say the word. Copy that, Musashi replied, glancing up as the sound of a shuttle on approach caught his attention. Target is inbound, he informed the others. We are a go. The shuttle eased down into the arena as the main hatch opened. Chugaz Uiden stepped down the short gangway, flanked on either side by his retinue as he strode towards the center of the amphitheater. All traces of humor vanished from Jiaj's face as he strode out to meet him with Nasat and Lin in tow. Musashi himself hung back. The tradition only allowed 2 others on the field to act as the Konhim equivalent of seconds, leaving him free to coordinate the teams if Plan A went to shit. As far as he was concerned, Plan A had gone out the window the second Chugaz Uiden agreed to their terms. There was absolutely no way that snake was going to play by the rules. After disgorging its passengers, the shuttle lifted off once more and settled a short distance away, just outside the amphitheater. The 2 groups stopped a couple meters apart in the center of the arena. Chugaz Uiden, Jiaj said formally, inclining his head. Jiaj Guyaz, the Diaksh sneered. It has been a long time. Far too long, Jiaj agreed. This matter should have been settled years ago. The Diaksh glanced at Nasat and Lin as his sneer grew wider. Consorting with the enemy, and yet you dare impugn my honor. You do not know the meaning of the word, Jiaj fired back. I will, however, be glad to teach it to you. Chugaz scowled. Enough talk. He pulled his dagger from its scabbard. I have a war to win. Jiaj held up his hand. Not so fast. He motioned to Sergeant Lin, who stepped forward with a case of his own, flipping it open to reveal a pair of matched blades. To ensure the contest is based purely on skill, he said knowingly. Choose. The Diaksh's scowl deepened. You insult me yet again, Jiaj, by accusing me of deception. I accuse you of nothing, Jiaj said calmly. It is, however, my right. Choose or forfeit. Chugaz snarled in quiet fury before handing off his dagger to his second. He stomped over to where Lin waited and plucked both blades from the case, making a great show of thoroughly inspecting both weapons. Finally, he made his choice, flipping the other knife at Jiaj in a gesture of utter contempt. Jiaj easily caught the thrown blade by its handle, nodding to Nasat and Lin as Chugaz gestured to his own seconds. All 4 stepped out of the ring, taking up positions at the cardinal points marked on the earth. Moving to a crouch, Jiaj readied himself. The field of honor is clear, he intoned. Only one may leave it alive. You should have stayed in exile, Chugaz said mockingly. Instead, you will die impaled on my blade. One of us will, Jiaj said calmly. Chugaz sneered at him once more, slowly working his way around him, sizing him up while Jiaj pivoted in place. Without warning, the Diaksh screamed with rage, leaping into the air, driving the dagger straight at Jiaj's heart.